Hello and good evening, and welcome to our Zoom for NEU members. We're just going to get started, but some accessibility features on the call. Bottom of the screen, you see a button that says closed caption. Press it, and you can turn the subtitles on. You can also download a transcript of this call. We also have Sam Riddle and Nikki Evans providing BSL interpretation services this evening. We also have a team of staff behind the scenes, so if you have any questions, put a message in the chat. Thanks very much. I'll hand over to Robin Bevan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. And I'm going to take the opportunity in thanking Mike to also thank all the others behind the scenes tonight. Richard, Dorothea, Candy and Henry, who will be enabling us to run what we hope will be a very smooth hour of information, updates and questions and answers. Thank you very much for joining the call. My watch here tells me we're just before 5 o'clock, so I'm expecting that we will have more people arriving over the next few minutes. So allow me just to take a moment to run through one or two small items with you. First of all, the chat is open for your comments tonight, and it's great to see Sam McKindy saying hello from Hertfordshire. Sinead, I can't see your surname, but good evening from Woburn Sands. And both Sam and Sinead, when posting those messages in the chat, have taken the opportunity of changing the little drop-down menu so that it says all panelists and attendees. That way everybody can see the comments that they're posting at this stage of the evening. Those comments are, of course, little more than good evening welcomes from all across the country. We are expecting several hundred people to be joining tonight's call, which is open to all NEU members. It's being recorded, and I can also tell you that it's being broadcast live on various social media channels. So that is a fabulous opportunity to give you an indication of the scale and reach of our union, but also a perfect opportunity to remind you that we do have a fairly straightforward behaviour policy in relation to these meetings. It's nothing that you wouldn't expect. We just ask that everybody who posts messages in the chat or contributes in any other way is suitably respectful of everybody who is on the call and the varying and different views that we may have about pressing issues. The programme for this evening will be a presentation from your joint General Secretaries, Kevin Courtney and Mary Bousted. They'll be taking you through a range of issues, some of which are immediate and relevant to the circumstances that you're in your schools and colleges across the country. Some of what they'll be saying is a little bit more long-term, looking ahead to issues around matters such as assessment within our schools. So please listen carefully to what they have to say. A key component of tonight's call will be a reminder of the fact that you, together with your fellow union members in your workplace, can have real influence on the working conditions and the working hours that you deliver. And we're going to help you with some of those issues specifically tonight in relation to what we technically refer to as directed time. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. We have nearly 200 on the call. In a moment, I'm just going to hand over to Kevin and Mary, but just before I do, a warm welcome also onto the call and grateful thanks to Nikki Evans and to Sam Riddle, who will be providing British Sign Language interpretation for us. And also, one final thing from me is to say that the Q&A function provides you with an opportunity to post your questions. Please post them from fairly early on during the contributions from Mary and Kevin. That will then allow us, as you listen to what Mary and Kevin say, and as you post your questions, it allows us to group those questions into themes, and it allows us to see what the key issues are, which enables us to best answer your questions. And it may be tonight you put a question in there that we don't answer, but rest assured, we record all of those questions and we use them to generate the advice that the union uses in meeting the needs and serving its 450,000 members across the country. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Keep saying hello through the chat, and I'm going to hand over to Kevin first, I think, this evening, as our Joint General Secretaries provide their presentation to us. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Robin, and thank you to everyone that's joined this call tonight. We all know, me and Mary know, how tiring this school year has been, with so many challenges that you as teachers and support staff have had to rise to. The work you've done as educators has been so important. You've moved learning online whilst keeping schools and colleges open for key worker and vulnerable children. You've had to cope with the incompetence of government over exam assessment, both last year and this year. You've coped with the return to in-person education and the very real difficulties that children are presented with. And the work you've done as reps and members of the union has been so vital as well. You've helped keep your colleagues safer, kept schools safer than they would otherwise have been, whether through the checklists that we put out, fighting for better procedures in schools for protection of clinically extremely vulnerable or pregnant women, or through the use of Section 44 following that huge meeting that we had in January. Thank you for everything you've done this year.
Now, we hope, but there's no way that we can be certain that we are actually seeing the end of the light of the tunnel on COVID. Although with the case numbers rising, that we can't ever be certain of that. And we know also that if we are seeing the end of the light of the tunnel, it's due to the scientists who developed the vaccine and the NHS that rolled out the vaccine so successfully. And our union, the NEU, has done all it can to support the vaccination effort. We've emailed members as their vaccination has come due, and we've been promoting teaching materials that address vaccine hesitancy. The NEU will keep on top of all of that and on the issues surrounding long COVID. But we want to focus tonight not on workload, not on COVID, but on workload. We want to focus on workload. That epidemic hasn't gone away. And we also want to focus on the steps that we can take to address it. Now, during COVID, we called Zoom calls, we talked to school and college reps about safety, we advocated for checklists to use in schools and colleges, we repeated those Zoom calls with members, and at the same time, we wrote to head teachers about the safety checklists. Then when our branch secretaries and our reps went to those heads, asking for a meeting about COVID safety, the heads were expecting them to ask for that meeting. They were expecting those calls. And then our branch secretaries set up our reps WhatsApp groups so that our school and college reps could share experiences and get support. And we want to repeat that sort of organisation, that sort of communication, that sort of support. We want to repeat that over workload, focusing on particular issues where change can be made at school or college level to reduce workload. And at the same time, we want to address the issues about excessive workload with government, with multi-academy trusts. So we really want to have a national focus and a local focus on workload, because that strengthens what we can do together to tackle the epidemic of workload.
We don't intend this to be a one-off. We're intending to keep working on it, to keep the focus for politicians, for school leaders, for the union on the issues that matter to teachers and support staff in schools and colleges. And right now, this term, we've got a particular focus on directed time. That's not the only issue we're dealing with in schools. We have school groups winning right now, winning changes on all sorts of other issues at the moment, over pensions in independent schools, over pay in sixth form colleges, over workload across the piece. But we also want a national focus on directed time. There is a national decreed limit on directed time, but in many schools it's ignored or not measured. And dealing with directed time, we know, doesn't address all the issues of workload by any means, but establishing the principle that head teachers must budget for directed time, must discuss that budget with staff. That can be a start to discussions over other aspects of workload as well. So for us, our focus on directed time is a start, not the end. It's a bit of the national contract that has a limit on workload. We want to fight to implement the national contract we do have as part of fighting for a better national contract in the future. It's a national standard directed time that matters. Heads are required to follow it in state schools.
But even if the 1265 hours doesn't apply in your particular setting, there is still a chance to raise with your leadership, with your school management and leadership, issues of workload. And for support staff who aren't covered by the 1265 hours, there's also the matter of raising with the leadership and management that the support staff should only be asked to work their contracted hours. Now, our survey results show that a quarter of schools do produce a directed time calendar, but we want to increase that number and then to increase that number again the next year. Now, in some of those quarter of those schools, heads discuss that directed time calendar with their staff, discussing such matters as how many meetings are there in a particular week? Do you have staff meetings in the same week that you have parents' evenings? So we also want to increase the number of schools where that discussion between leadership and teachers and support staff actually happens. And as we said earlier, we want to establish that workload is something to be discussed just as an important step in itself.
And we do know that members are engaging with this, because we know that in more than 9,000 schools in England, somebody has downloaded our materials. That is actually a huge level of engagement. So now we're talking to you as members. We talked to reps yesterday. We talked to branch officers last week. We really want there to be conversations amongst union members in schools that agree that the rep should take a message to the head teacher, asking the head teacher to publish a directed time calendar and to discuss a draft of that directed time calendar with you as staff at the school. We've written to all heads about it, so they will be expecting you to be in contact. We've spoken to the NAHT and ASCL about it, who are supportive of what we're doing. And we are getting some very positive feedback. We want to celebrate every success that you win on that, because we're confident that just as working together over COVID made schools safer, we can also work together to make schools less stressful and less workload heavy.
Now, we intend to roll out much more about workload and other workplace issues during the next school year, issues that affect teachers and support staff and school leaders and college leaders. And we're going to spend some time developing talking about international comparisons, because the international comparisons about how teachers are treated in England and across other nations should make the government very, very uncomfortable. Now, Wales and Scotland didn't take part in the survey I'm going to talk about just now, only England did. So we can't talk about Wales and Scotland, but we can say that we think the problems are similar in Wales and in Northern Ireland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I'm sure in Scotland as well. And the comparison should make the government very uncomfortable, because what they show is that teachers in England are working many more hours than their counterparts internationally. Not in the amount of time they're teaching. Teachers in England teach about 21.5 hours a week. In Scotland, it's an hour more, but they're bringing that down. But across, international comparisons, teachers do teach about 21.5 hours a week. But it's the out of class work, the lesson preparation, the marking, the data entry, and so on, where English teachers are spending about double the time of their international counterparts. And what the international comparisons also show is that teachers in England are much more observed and monitored than teachers elsewhere. They have less autonomy in their work. And that leads to stress levels in England that are double the international average for teachers. Our teachers are twice as stressed as teachers in other countries. So we're going to come back to that with you next term and throughout next year. This term, we want to focus on directed time and the 1265 hours. And we think the reason why we're focusing on directed time and 1265 hours is that is a lead-in to the larger conversation we want to launch about workload next term.
When we write to head teachers about this, we're conscious that thousands of head teachers are actually members of our union and committed to an ethical form of leadership. So we're talking to all head teachers, including our members. But we also wanted to tell you about some other really important work that the union is doing that is still really relevant to you in your classroom and in your school. Last week, we launched, the Independent Commission on Assessment was launched. We're funding this, but it is independent. Its launch was the subject of an editorial in the Sunday Times, which tells you that it's cutting through. That's a case of the National Education Union being in the right place at the right time. There is a debate on assessment, primary and secondary, that is raging in the Conservative Party. Nick Gibb and Robert Halfon, Nick Gibb, the schools minister, Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee, they've been exchanging blogs, competing with one another on the Conservative Home website, trading blows. Nick Gibb for the status quo of exam mania and SATs, Robert Halfon calling for the current exam diet tired and failing. There's a group of Conservative MPs that have produced papers calling for the end of SATs, the abolition of GCSEs, the development of a 14 to 18 education phase with a baccalaureate qualification at age 18. We go to all of the party conferences, and this year at the Conservative conference, we've got a fringe meeting with that group of MPs that are calling for the abolition of SATs and changes to secondary assessment. The independent commission that we've set up and are funding has representatives from the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, from the Edge Foundation. These are not the NEU's normal friends, but that's a real strength of this commission.
And the Commission on Secondary Assessment puts us on the same place as we are, the NEU is on primary assessment, where we have an umbrella group of a range of organisations. It's called More Than a Score, and that is closely aligned with NEU policy, and it campaigns for the abolition of SATs in primary schools, campaigns extremely effectively for the abolition of standardised testing in primary schools. Now, More Than a Score is not the NEU, but the NEU funds that coalition, and we use that to get the widest range of organisations to work with us to support our policies and to have a wider range of voices leading to the outcomes that we want. We've also launched on our website a No Child Left Behind pledge, and we've asked MPs to sign the pledge. So the website shows the number of children in each constituency which are trapped in poverty, both as a number and as a percentage. And so you just click, I've been on the website, you click on your constituency, you can see the number of children in poverty, both in numerical terms and as a percentage of children in that constituency. So it's really hard-hitting, it's really visual, it's really interesting. We think that teachers are often blamed for the effects of poverty, of child poverty. And we want to point to where the real problem is, which is not teachers and support staff and leaders. That's not the reason for children's poverty. Teachers and support staff and leaders fight against and support families tackling poverty. The real problem is poverty itself. So in all this activity, we never lose sight of the fact that our members working in schools and in colleges need real and practical support for them to help in their day-to-day work in schools and colleges.
Last term, during January and February and March, during lockdown, we created a remote education hub to support members on pedagogy and help them network directly with one another. We know that reps and members learn best from one another, and we can build the union's strength and an impact on teaching and learning. This term, we rebranded as, instead of remote education, as the Recovery Education Hub. And that has practical tips on the research about recovery, pedagogy. It gives union advice on how to discuss and bargain with school management around what education should look like during this period. It offers a platform for members to share their practice. We would really like you to try out the Recovery Education Hub and let us know how it's working. It's got practical blogs, advice on behavior, motivation, engagement, how to bring outdoor learning into the whole curriculum, about oracy, inclusive reading, and lots on student and staff well-being. We're also working to support members in managing pupil behavior. It's one of the issues that our members call our advice line about regularly.
So we've just launched advice to help reps and members review their behaviour policy and in order that it meets staff and student needs. It sets out why the NEU doesn't support zero tolerance policies, explains how damaging these are for Black and working class students and students with SEND. But we do want to support our members in their schools and colleges in developing really good, really effective behaviour policies, because that makes working lives for teachers and support staff and leaders so much better. It makes learning lives for pupils so much better, that they can learn in peace, they can learn securely, they can get on with their work, and they can achieve what they want throughout their education. So we want good behaviour, and the guidance is there to support schools and colleges in developing just that. We've also launched a resource called Turning the Page on Poverty, about how to explore in schools and investigate how poverty affects attainment in learning in your school. And it's practical, and it's useful, and it's powerful. So we're really working to get practical support and guidance out to members, out to schools, so that you can be supported in doing your work better and doing it more effectively.
We're doing much more on racism, on LGBT rights, on sexual harassment, for example. So we want to say the union is all of us, and it's there for you. We want the union to be in your work, campaigning for better work, striving to make work doable, acting to achieve fair workplaces where all colleagues are treated with dignity and respect. The National Education Union is not the head office in London. It's not our regional offices. It's you working together for your pupils and for each other. We are here to support you in doing that. We are proud to be your joint general secretaries. And though we know we can always do better, we're not complacent. We are very proud of the NEU.
And we're very proud that you have done such marvellous work during COVID. You are, we know, exhausted. Teachers, leaders, everyone working in schools and colleges are on their knees. The fact you're on this call is marvellous in itself. So we do hope that you have a very good summer holiday. We hope you come back in the autumn term ready to work with us and with each other to improve your working lives, and improving your working lives, improving the learning lives of your pupils and your students. Thanks for being on the call tonight.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much, Kevin. And during the course of the presentation that we've just heard, we've received questions on a range of themes. So what I'm going to do is just use this as a moment, firstly, to remind anybody that you can post a question in the Q&A function for us to pick up and feed through to Kevin and Mary, but also to remind you that you may also want to provide some kind of comment in the chat. We're going to be taking questions about directed time and about looking to ensure that workload is well managed in the workplace. My thanks to Simon Catamol for posting one of those questions, which we'll use and develop Simon in responding. After that, we've got some questions. Unsurprisingly, they're questions about the COVID situation, particularly in some parts of the country. Important for us to reflect on that. So we will spend a few moments looking at some of those issues. And then we'll come back to some further questions. There's one around pay. But just before we take those questions, you heard Mary and Kevin talking about one of the really important issues that has been absolutely forefront, particularly for secondary school staff during the course of this year and last year. And this is the issue of fair and reliable assessment for our pupils. And we know that the old system of masses of exams crammed into a very short space of time was not serving our pupils well. Certainly wasn't serving all pupils well, even if a small number thrive in that environment. We also know that what's happened last year and this year has really not helped at all in the late announcements, the lack of moderation, and I know many of you will have lived through this ridiculous 48-hour window in which you've had to draw together samples and submit them to the exam boards in the last couple of days. So before we go to the Q&A, we've got a little video that we know will help stimulate your thoughts about the work of the Independent Assessment Commission, and I'm sure will resonate with many of the views that you have about assessment in our schools at the moment. Thank you very much,
Some
Mike.
kids obviously are getting extremely stressed, like myself, to a point where they're thinking, what's the point?
We have a whole generation of students who don't want to do anything unless they're being assessed on it.
We're just learning how to prepare for the exams, and like our whole mind is focused on that.
The purpose of education has to be about helping young people to become career and life ready. Young people who can go into society and be positive contributors, both socially and economically.
In essence, it's the beginning of a national conversation in England about assessment, qualifications and the curriculum.
There's not an awful lot you can do as a teacher actually to make exam practice exciting and fun. It's relentless, it's repetitive, it's not exciting.
Some people do better with just coursework, some people do better with exams, but when everything is just an exam basis, there is people set out to fail.
So that forgotten third is incredibly important. I mean, firstly, those students have their confidence shattered.
For them, it's a barrier they're never going to get past. They've been told when they were 11 that they're not going to get the results that they want. And by the time you get to year 9 or 10, it takes an incredibly stubborn kid, of which some exist, to say, no, you're wrong, I can still do this, but there's not many of them.
They have different talents. They have a different and important contribution to make to society.
My cousin, through lockdown, he had his GCSEs then, so he didn't get them, and because they went off postcode and he has a North East postcode, he was predicted to pass everything in like 7s and 8s, and he only passed maths with a 5, everything else he got a 3 in.
I feel that we're going back to the old-fashioned times where you were constantly based on class, where you're lower class, upper class, middle class.
Oh, it's completely just based on
it's class. Like, yeah.
It's in the interests of all of us that all of our young people have a sense of progression and can see the roles that they can play and the ways in which they can contribute individually and collectively to the kind of society of which we would all like to be part.
It's not about what you write, it's about what's on that mark scheme. No one thinks exactly the same as another person. And in real life, in the workplace, you don't want everyone thinking the exact same. You need a lot of different minds, thinking about different things to overcome problems.
Employers, they report that when young people come to work with them to begin with, they actually have to unpick a lot of what they described as the damage done by the qualification system. A system that has encouraged young people to conform, to rote learn, to be unwilling to take risks. The phrase used by employers was, they're looking for people who have a growth mindset. Because in business and industry, things do go wrong. And they need young people who, rather than retreat into themselves when things become difficult, they need people who are resilient, who can cope with failure, and who can turn ideas round.
What we end up with is schools which become exam factories.
All the value becomes limited to that moment, that exam, and that grade that you get at the end. But there's no value in teamwork, and there's no value in independence, and there's no value in creativity, and there's no value in enjoying what you're doing. And if you don't get that grade at the end, then where's the value been in education?
Education is the most exciting job in the world because it's about the creation of the next generation. Fundamentally, the Independent Assessment Commission has to bring the joy back into education.
Thank you very much indeed to the technical team for placing that video there for us to see. Thank you to Professor Louise Hayward, who's leading that commission. And I'm sure that the life stories that we were hearing projected through that video resonate with all of us, whether we're working in early years, primary, secondary, or post-16. That actually we know that at the moment there is indeed a whole sector of our school student population for whom the current model of assessment really isn't working, and others who are being assessed on only such a narrow range of what actually is worthwhile to pursue in their education. You can see in the chat, and thank you very much, we've got a link to the Assessment Commission website, www.neweraassessment.org.uk. If I can encourage as many of you as possible to click on that, take a look at the videos, read the blogs that are there, and please do follow on social media and amplify the message for us as that commission is going forward with its work. So as promised, we're going to turn to some questions and answers, and I promised that the first question would be one around issues of workload and directed time. I'm going to read Simon's question out to Kevin and Mary, and I'm also going to just add some personal comment as well once I've read the question, because I do think that there is an issue in Simon's question that I can reflect on as a serving head teacher that may just be helpful. And Simon says, we are merging as a sixth form college into a general FE college, and the pay and conditions proposals will significantly worsen the conditions for new teachers. Clearly that on its own is a reason for members in that college to be pulling together with union support. But Simon says that he's asking for 1,265 hours, the directed time element, to remain as part of the negotiations. How do you think I can press this point? Now, I promised you I would offer some personal comment on this. And Simon, as a serving head teacher, I find the 1,265 hour restriction on directed time incredibly helpful. It allows me to really clearly work with the staff in terms of what is expected of them in terms of their teaching duties, when they're going to be expected to remain on site for parents' evenings, for example. It helps us to limit and focus our meeting time, and 1,265 hours is plenty enough to allow you to ensure that all the things that your staff members need to do on site together can be done in a reasonable, appropriate and manageable way. And Simon, I'm just going to give you a second benefit, which is that it makes it really easy then to agree with your part-time colleagues, and within the sixth form college and FE environment, there's a significant number of part-time employees. It's really easy then to agree what additional expectations your part-time colleagues should be required to do, and where the limit sits for them, which training events should they attend and which not. I'm going to broaden the question. I'm going to go to Kevin and Mary, and I'm going to say, okay, what should Simon do to persuade his college of the importance of this? And more generally, what should anybody on the call do if at the moment their school or college is not recognizing the need for a workload managed calendar and a set of clear limits on what they're expected to do? I'm going to go to Mary first, if I may, and then I'll switch across to Kevin.
Thank you, Robin. I think that, Simon, it's a really good question. And I think I would say that I was in a meeting with Nick Gibb yesterday, the school's minister, and it got onto workload. And this is Nick Gibb talking, not a normal ally. And he said the jobs market for graduates is becoming very, very competitive. They have choices about where they work and how they want to work. And if he was very clear, he said, if the education system wants to retain teachers in schools and in colleges, then it had better start treating them better than they are being treated now. In particular, he was talking about the fact that so many teachers are women, and that many of them, when they have children, want to work flexibly, and that is too often, or work part-time, and that is too often just ruled out. And what happens if you say no to a teacher who wants to work part-time, maybe because they have young children, is that they leave. So rather than having that teacher part-time, they've been lost to the profession. He was also talking about flexible working. No, that has particular challenges for schools, absolutely. But he was talking about that. But he was saying if workload is not planned for and considered and is not improved, when the jobs market improves and it's and he thinks the economic recovery will come back quicker than even predicted, then we are going to have, at the moment, there is a rise in applications to teacher training because of the pandemic, but that is already flattening out. Already, those people who've applied are looking for other work. And one of the reasons they do that, one of the main reasons they do that, is they hear from teachers about what young people hear from teachers is about how exhausting the work is, how hard the work is, how they don't have free time, how they don't have time at the weekend, and it's a picture of something which is relentless. So I think that one of the main recognitions that are going to have to really come upon us as a profession is, unless we do something about working conditions and workload, we're going to have an even bigger problem with teacher retention. And it's already the case that 1 in 4 teachers leaves within the first 2 years. Over a third leave within 5 years. Nearly 40% leave within 10 years. And the reason that they give for why they leave, overwhelmingly, is the unrelenting excessive work, which drives them to stress levels, which I said in the talk, are twice the international comparisons. So, it's very clear. I remember giving a talk in East Anglia a few years ago, where I said to school leaders, if we don't look after the workforce, then there won't be a workforce. And they found that message quite challenging. I think it's getting out more now. And I'm going to a meeting next week with Gavin Williamson about workload and teacher wellbeing. Now, I regard myself as a teacher, and I think I'll have a lot of work to do there in educating Gavin about the causes of excessive workload, but I'll do my best. But I think that recognition is really being spread now.
Thank you, Mary. I will come to you, Kevin, on that same question. And in doing so, I just want to emphasize that key role, of course, that many of our NEU leadership members can play in this campaign, which is demonstrating that actually in those workplaces where workload is properly managed, properly addressed, and where there is a good culture of support for those in the classroom and those supporting in the classroom, that those are the places where people stay. That's where you get good quality staff remaining and good quality staff applying. So Simon, there's another key argument. If your college keeps to a sensible and restricted approach, it can actually help it to recruit and retain the best teachers. Kevin, I'm going to ask you to comment on what might people do next. And while we've been talking, there's been a really great question posted by Munesh Mashiri about work in the independent sector. And I'll just pick up on that, Kevin, after you've spoken, unless you want to address it straight away. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. And I think that what you and Mary have done is outlined the argument that we will be making to head teachers. And many of them will accept these arguments. But there is a simple union method that we go through when there is a concern that we've got in the situation that Simon described or that Munesh has asked about here. And that is the rep talking with the members, establishing that there is a common concern. Members, if you haven't got a rep, electing a rep, then having a conversation of members, establishing what the common concerns are, the rep, and that can be more than one person. You can have 2 reps, 3 reps even, taking the case to the head teacher, presenting the case, and then reporting back to members what the head teacher or other school leaders say about it. And going through that cycle, establishing that there is common cause, that there is something that people think should change, preparing a bit of the case and taking it to the school leaders, reporting back. If we don't get progress that is satisfactory at that stage, talking to your branch about it. And at the same time, finding out from reps elsewhere, most branches now have a reps WhatsApp group, asking in that WhatsApp group what's happening in similar schools. So there's a very direct point around Simon's question on that, because we know that in other sixth form colleges that have merged into FE colleges, the FE colleges have agreed to maintain sixth form conditions. So at Shrewsbury College, part of a very big merger, but the sixth form component still has sixth form conditions. At City and Islington, part of a big college in London, we still have sixth form teacher conditions in there. So find that out from other reps. If necessary, the branch secretary will support you, but always just going through this cycle. And you know, simple as it is, that cycle works. Finding out what members have as a common concern, taking it to the head teacher, making the case. Sometimes the head teacher agrees with all of it. Sometimes a bit of persuasion is needed, and sometimes the head teacher will agree some part of it, and members will think, actually, that part the head teacher's agreed with, that's enough for us. Other times that in difficult circumstances, sometimes the head doesn't reach the position we want at that first stage, and then go to the branch secretary and ask for some support in that situation. In extremis, we reach ballots for industrial action, and we've had a number of those recently, which have had very positive effects. But in the vast majority of cases, we get progress well before that, and that's our union method. And when we're doing something big like directed time, we're making sure there are lots of resources to support members and reps in how to make this case. So in this particular situation, I mean, what I've just said works when there's any sort of concern. But in the particular situation around directed time, there are fantastic resources on our website. There is a spreadsheet that you can use to calculate the directed hours in your school. There are model letters that you can amend to send to your head as a precursor to the meeting that you're having. There are routes back for reporting back to members. There are so many resources on there that can help you take that case forward in your school.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I did promise that we'd raise Munash's question. And we have, as a union, tens of thousands of members who work in the independent sector, strongly supported. Just going to mention fabulous work by John Richardson, who's the national officer who supports them. And Munash's question, in the independent sector, everything, including workload and directed time, is always referenced back to their contracts. And I can understand why that's the case. Very often contracts that have been drawn up very specific to the school or college context. Now, Munash asks, can these contracts be challenged? And I'm going to throw that question to Mary. And I do know that there are resources, I think, that we're preparing to support, in particular, independent sector members on these issues. Mary.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. And there are indeed resources that are being prepared to enable members in independent schools to look at their contracts and to negotiate on them. But the contracts are written in a sort of, often they're written in a catch-all way that, captures everything. But they have to be reasonable. You have a right to time off work. You have a right to leisure time. You have a right to rest time. We did take a few years ago now, we did take a landmark tribunal case against a very high-ranking headmasters college independent school who had a young woman teacher, young female teacher who was a house mistress and who was expected to be on site all the way through the weekend, but was not paid for that because the school said she wasn't working. But she couldn't engage in any normal leisure activity. She couldn't go out, she couldn't go shopping, she couldn't meet her friends because she had to be on site, available to manage the pupils. And we said that that was not fair. We said that could not be the meaning of the contract, and that actually once we worked out her pay, it was Marlborough College actually, that she was earning less than the minimum wage. And we won that. We won that employment tribunal. And we've won other employment tribunals where there have been unreasonable practices expected of independent school teachers. If we take these cases, it is a lot better if we have the union recognised in the school. So Munash, I don't know if the NEU is recognised in your school, but if it's not, then the advice I would give is that, try to get more members into the union. Try to get a meeting of the members. Try to discuss the concerns. Contact your local branch, and let's work to build the union in the school to get recognition, because once you've got recognition, then the employer, it's much more difficult for the employer not to negotiate with you. It's much more likely that they will want to negotiate with you, because they know that you can take collective action, take collective positions where you're being asked to do things which just are completely unreasonable. So union recognition is really important, and your branch can help you through the stages to get recognition.
Very much, Mary. And you mentioned Marlborough College, but we also have very strong representation in independent schools like Mill Hill, big North London independent school. Excellent work done by the rep there, just gathering members together, expressing views, and what the leadership and governance of those organisations soon realise is that if you want to have a high functioning, effective school, you've got to look after your staff. And that includes putting limits on what's expected of them. So thank you very much to Simon for your question. Thank you to Munash. And we're moving on to some COVID related questions as a block. Kevin, I'll come to you on these. I'm going to read all three questions out. To some extent, they are repeats of questions that we've answered previously, but now transferred into a new context. Sure. Where we've got variable infection rates, a new variant, and of course, high levels of vaccination as well, but not complete vaccination. So Rach Andrews simply asks, is it safe to be working in very high COVID-19 areas? That's the first of those questions. From Judith Lamour, CEV immune suppressed COVID figures are going, okay, right, apologies, I didn't read that well. Okay, so what Judith is saying is that COVID figures are going up, that for those who are clinically extremely vulnerable, they are beginning to feel very vulnerable back in school. Again, my apologies once again, I'm not reading this terribly well. Is there any new advice around the management of CEV individuals in the workplace now that, and Judith says, the government has forgotten about us? Thank you, Judith. Apologies, I didn't read that very well. Hannah Thompson says, with the uncertainty surrounding the safety of pregnant women in the third trimester in the autumn term, what will your advice be from September for those in their third trimester? As the end of the year is nearing, many of us are unsure as to whether your advice will still be to work from home from 28 weeks and what impact that has on our safety if schools are expecting us to be in large bubbles from September. Kind of feeds in as well to the fact that we're missing at the moment any clear, direct governmental advice about the organisation of schools from September. So, Kevin, I'll let you come in on those if I may, and then Mary, I'll pick up with you on a paid question to follow, if I may. Kevin.
Thanks, Robin. These are important questions, and they're being raised in a context where we are uncertain how things will be playing out in the autumn term. We do hope that the spread of vaccination of single dose and of double dose, we're at something like 82% of adults have had a single dose, and somewhere over, just over 60%, I think, have had a second dose. And there is a hope amongst the scientists that eventually we'll reach a point where the virus can't spread because there is an inhibition in transmission with the vaccination. But we're not certain, and the scientists aren't certain where we'll be in September. So there are things that really matter right now, and I think it's really important to talk about them. We've just had, in the last couple of hours, the data on how many school outbreaks there were last week. Now, a cluster in a school, an outbreak, is 2 cases or more. So it can be quite small, but we've just seen the data and it is now bigger than at any time in the January term. And it's just got, it's still nowhere like where it was in September, October term, but it is higher. The number of outbreaks in schools last week was higher than at any time in the January term. And there are consequences of that. The number of children who are being sent home for self-isolation as they were close contacts in all the same room as a child. And generally, you don't find that they've got COVID, but it's a way of protecting and trying to stop the spread. But we're sending home hundreds of thousands of children because we have lost control of the virus. So as well as the concern about safety, I'm going to come on to that, there is also the concern about the disruption of education. And all of that means that we are more and more Going back to the point that we tried to convince Gavin Williamson of, that he should not have removed mask wearing. It's not a silver bullet, but the more mitigations you have in place, the more interruption of the virus there can be. So we are saying in secondary schools, especially in those higher rate areas, mask wearing should come back. It is inconvenient, but nothing like as inconvenient as being sent home. It's really vital to work on ventilation. COVID is an airborne disease. We want to stop the spread of this disease. Ventilation really matters. Being outdoors as much as possible really matters. And there are some opportunities to do that, and we should take them. And all of that needs to be put in place in schools as much as we can. And if you're clinically extremely vulnerable, I think there should be a conversation with your head teacher about, I'd really like to be in the best ventilated classroom, in the best ventilated space. But we have to acknowledge, though, we're not in the same place that we were in the autumn term. The vaccination is making a real difference. And the data that we're seeing from the government, and no scientists are disagreeing with this data, so it's consensual, that after you've had 2 doses of either Pfizer or AstraZeneca, plus the time to build up antibodies, there is a really high degree of protection against a serious case of COVID. The sorts of degree of protection they're talking about are 94% reduction in the chance of you being hospitalized. And that is with the Delta variant. That's not with previous variants. They've got enough data to know that even with the Delta variant, 3 weeks after your second dose, you're 94% less likely than you would have been if you weren't vaccinated to have to go to hospital if you contract the virus. Now, we still want to reduce the chance of contracting the virus. That's what the mask wearing, the ventilation is about, to try and reduce that as well. But I think that people should feel that that 94% protection is a very high rate of protection. Now, we don't know where we'll be in September. Mary and I were at a meeting today with senior civil servants and with scientists, and they were talking about that, the possibilities for September. We don't know whether JCVI will advocate for the vaccination of secondary school children. We're not the scientists. Frankly, I hope that they are going to recommend for it, because I think it will prevent children being sent home. But they've got a serious job to do of assessing the risks, of the very small risks that vaccination causes against the other risks. So the JCVI are doing that work. The government is looking at testing all children before return to school in September. But let's hope that cases are lower because the spread of the vaccination. So we're going to be monitoring this throughout the summer. We'll be talking more about it, but we're hoping that the protection will prove to be as solid as the scientists are all telling us it is at the moment. And that is a really high degree of protection, even for people who are vulnerable or in the 3rd trimester. So if that vaccination is giving that degree of protection, then that will have to play into our thinking about what we say to members in that situation. We'll still want to do everything we can to stop the spread of this virus, because there's still a 6% chance of being hospitalized. The chance of dying is even lower than an even bigger reduction than the 94% reduction. So it's getting very small, those risks.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. And clearly, it's an issue that remains relevant to our members. It's an issue which will continue to be at the forefront of a lot of planning and thinking. And also, we're still waiting to know exactly what the effects of vaccination are in the long term in terms of reducing transmission. There have been a few people posting comment in the chat around the management of COVID cases within your own school. I would encourage you, if you're concerned about the management of COVID cases in your own school, ask the school leadership for their risk assessment. and go with it to your local district branch official if you're not happy about something, and they will be able to cross-check it with what local public health are requiring. And that won't, I'm afraid, be identical in all parts of the country, so you will need to look for an answer more locally on that particular issue. Now, I promised a question about pay. We've got 6 or 7 minutes remaining. And just to say, those of you who have seen that your questions have been answered live, what it means is that it's been passed through to the panel to look at. We won't be able to take every single question, but that's what it means if you've seen that your question's being answered live. Alex Ogg has asked a question about pay. I'm going to come to Mary on this. And he says, hi all, I'm concerned at my school. They're trying to introduce a policy where upper pay range teachers, sometimes referred to as UPS, upper pay range teachers have to do an additional project to maintain their UPR status or to progress on the UPR scale. They have threatened UPR teachers who refuse to comply with a quote unquote support package. Any advice gratefully received. Mary, just straight to you on this one, please.
Okay, so the upper pay range is designed to recognise the greater expertise of teachers who have the experience and the expertise to be extremely good teachers. Upper pay range teachers, sometimes, you know, they're more likely to be school mentors. If you've got initial teacher trainers in the school, they may be looking at leading on some aspects of the school's work, but they are absolutely not required to be doing projects or to be taking on additional responsibilities for which they are not paid. That was never the thought behind the upper pay range, and that was clearly written into the school teachers' pay and conditions document. I remember the negotiations where civil servants and government ministers were desperately trying to get us to agree to extra management responsibilities for staff on the upper pay range, and we did not do so. Where there are specific management responses, that you're either on the leadership line or you've got a TLR. So the school doesn't have any locus in saying that upper pay range teachers have to do a project. And I would also be really interested in what they think the project would be, because it sounds to me like an additional project could very well just be busy work. It's a sort of punitive, you're being paid more, so we want to see something for it, as though teachers aren't already, with working weeks approaching 50 hours, in often more. The secondary teachers taking GCSE and A-level classes over the past term, much more than 50 hours, although teachers aren't working hard enough. So they've got no right to do that. If they continue to press for that, then get in touch with your local branch and get in a branch officer. If you have a rep in the school, get them to get in touch with the branch officer and go back and just say, actually, you have no ground on which to stand to do this, and don't.
Thank you very much, Mary. And key starting point, absolutely key starting point, ask for that copy of the school pay policy, because that will make it very clear what is currently the policy, and then you check against, as Mary said, what is a reasonable expectation for anybody who is progressing in that way. Kevin, we've got a couple of questions that have come from Tanya and Emma. And they're both back on the workload issue, which we had put centre stage in this evening's discussion. So I do want to kind of go back to it. Tanya says, please can headquarters, it all sounds very grand, that the union's membership is spread all over the country. But yes, there is a building in London, and yes, there are staff who work there. But can headquarters devise a lesson plan on workload that reps can give on training days in schools and colleges? This is about having resources available for reps to use to help their staff manage these issues. I'm sure such a free session would be very welcomed by senior leadership and would also be good in recruiting new members. And then there's a question from Emma, I think it's Emma Milson-Franks, apologies if I'm misreading the name. And I'm going to just take Emma's question, expand it a little bit. And Emma is kind of saying, is it, what's driving this workload? Is it actually work that we need to do, or is it being driven by some kind of external indicators, requirements to meet other demands? Kevin, if you're happy to comment on that. I'm conscious we're just heading into the last minute or two. So after this, I'm just going to go back to Mary for a comment around assessment. So Kevin, please.
Well, I'd like to say hi to Tanya. I know Tanya, and I think her question's a very good one. And I just want to say that this term, staff in head office, along with staff in the regions, along with branch secretaries in a focus group, are working on materials that we are going to be rolling out during the autumn term. The materials we've got on our website, look at them on directed time, they're fantastic. But I said at the beginning, the directed time is only a start. So we're looking for materials on all the aspects of workload, and the sort of suggestion that Tanya makes might well fit into that, but we'll be launching those materials in the autumn term. We intend to crack down on the epidemic of workload. And the question of where it comes from that Emma asks is really important. Now, Mary talked when she was at the beginning of our contribution that we now have all this international evidence that teachers in England, and we believe in Wales and Northern Ireland, are doing far more hours than teachers elsewhere. So something is going wrong in our education system that's creating that. You know, the same number of hours in class, but vastly more, like twice as many hours outside classroom. So I've got a little explanation for you. It's league tables and Ofsted and a mentality that comes from those which blames teachers for the effect of poverty. League tables are actually not much more than a ranking of schools by the relative inequality of the children in them. But if you're at the bottom of the league table, it always feels like you have to do something more. And that something more ends up being producing a piece of paper that your head teacher feels that they need because of the pressure on them for Ofsted to show to someone else. And this is creating it's creating busy work that Mary talked about. The way that the international comparisons show is the extra work that teachers in England, and we assume in Wales and Northern Ireland are doing, is producing evidence. It's not producing exciting lesson plans. It's not giving feedback to children. It's producing evidence for someone else, or it's taking photographs of your practical maths class so that you can stick them in a book for a primary teacher to prove that you did the practical maths. Teachers in other countries would just run a mile at the suggestion that they were going to do that. And we're caught up a bit in this as well. We feel like we have to show that we've done the work, and we're going to be working on that. Emma's question of where this comes from is something we all have to talk about. Why is this extra work happening in our country? We think Ofsted is at the root of lots of this, is creating the downward pressure that everybody feels part of, and we're going to fight back against it.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And as we draw towards our conclusion, we're just very slightly overrunning. So thank you to everybody who's staying with us just beyond 6 o'clock. But as we do, I'm going to just put a simple question to Mary, and it's based on some comments that have come in from Stephanie Ellis. Thank you for that. You've put quite a detailed comment in there, and also a comment from Emma Milson Franks. And in both cases, they are talking either about curriculum provision that used to exist that's since disappeared, or about the fact that they've now moved away from providing students with opportunities that were really valuable and that mattered to providing them with courses that really don't meet their needs. And I guess at the heart of this, Mary, is a question about to what extent assessment is unhelpfully driving our curriculum design at the moment. Mary.
Yes, I mean, I saw both of the questions, and believe me, I feel both Emma and Stephanie and Stephanie's pain and Emma's pain as well. What we've had over the last 10 years, Michael Gove instituted this revolution, supported by Dominic Cummings, was a rewriting of the national curriculum under the guise of powerful knowledge, which meant that the curriculum became much more content heavy, and then reordering the assessment system, the 2014 exam reforms, so that it moved to examination as virtually the only method, you know, very much more powerful method than any other of assessing pupils' skills and abilities. That went through because you know, they were able to spin a narrative about we want to raise standards, so we're going to make the courses harder and we're going to make the exams harder. But that consensus is breaking down now. It's breaking down within the Conservative Party. So as Kevin said, recently Nick Gibb did a blog on the Conservative Home website saying GCSEs and A-levels are gold standard. And then Robert Halfon, who's chair of the Education Select Committee, a Conservative MP, wrote a blog 2 days later saying we've got a tired and dysfunctional assessment system. We're not developing skills and abilities. The curriculum's too narrow and it's disengaging. And in a very controversial report that the Education Select Committee put out, and it's a shame it's controversial because there are good things in the report, but they had to go for a bit of politics as well. They're saying that the curriculum is too disengaging for too many pupils. And the assessment system leads us into being top of the international league tables for rote learning. And rote learning is fine for lower order skills, but it's not fine for complex thinking, and it's not fine for making use of your knowledge in new situations. So I think the assessment crisis is coming to a head. The gap between poor children and more advantaged children, which was closing, is now widening again. I think that that is becoming more and more apparent. And I think the pressure for change is building, which is why the independent commission that the NEU is supporting is so important you know, and teachers will be asked to engage with that commission and leaders so that we can get the professional voice as well as parents' voice and industry voice into how our assessment system and our curriculum needs to change in order to meet the needs of the widest range of our pupils. And I just want to finish with this. It's not true that clever pupils should do academic work and non-clever pupils should do non-academic work. That's not true. Every child, every young person needs a broad and balanced curriculum, and everyone's clever at something. We need to broaden our notion of what clever is, and we need to broaden the range of experiences that our young people get. It is ridiculous that young people leave school not able to cook, that they haven't done any design technology, that they haven't done enough art and creativity, that they haven't had enough time to do PE. We have to broaden our curriculum and celebrate the talents and the achievements of all our children and young people who are all clever and able at different things. And why should we privilege a narrow academic view from the wider sets of skills and abilities? And I'll tell you what the most important thing it is to be clever about. It's most important to be clever about people. That's the skill that employers are saying they need more than anything else. The ability to work with other people, to talk to people, to empathize, to understand, to collaborate, to investigate, and to innovate together. And so our most important bit of being clever, if you want to use clever, is being clever about people.
Thank you very much, Mary. And through the chat, we're seeing strong affirmation for the views that you have just expressed. I want to finish just with a very short reflection. A few days ago, I was saying goodbye to the Year 13 students in my school, and I put a question to them. I asked them whether they lived at the moment in the best of all possible worlds. And not a single one indicated that they thought the world was currently the best it could possibly be. So I challenged them to use their art, their creativity, their ingenuity, their voice to bring about some small changes over the course of the next few years that would help to make the world a better place. And tonight we've heard on a range of issues, a range of really important issues, things that we can each do individually to begin to effect change for the benefit of those within our own schools and colleges, particularly for our colleagues. But sometimes that step is a difficult step to take individually. And that's where union membership, collective action becomes most powerful. So if you're going away from today feeling that you can't take the step that you need to bring about change on workload or whatever the issue is in your school, the safety arrangements related to COVID or the pay arrangements related to upper pay range, if you're going away feeling that you can't, then sit down tomorrow, share your views with your colleagues, agree together that you're not happy about it, and act on it together. You don't have to be a single rep who goes forward. You can go together, united with the support of the union behind you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you very much to Mary and Kevin for your extensive input. Thank you to all those who've supported the programme tonight. And we wish you the very best of a restful summer holiday when you get to the end of term, and look forward to future meetings of this kind in the autumn. Thank you very much indeed.